I love this because at 9 a.m. this morning, we're here, 10:30, worshiping, right? At 9 a.m. this morning, flurry of text comes through. Nothing is happening the way it's supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to give a message, like a little set-up devotional for Francis to come up here and share vision. He gets sick, texts us, and we're like, don't worry about it. Peter and Mercy, who are supposed to lead worship for us, they get sick, they're at home. We text this young man, Booker, who's just on cue, ready to go. And so thank you, that was amazing. He found out like 30 minutes before that he's leading worship for our church. But I love that because it's like nothing is going to stop us from worshiping God this morning.
That's right.
Nothing's going to stop us from worshiping God into 2022. And so, like I said, Francis was going to do some stuff here. We're adjusting on the fly. But what I want to do is I want to share a few thoughts from Scripture to lay a foundation for where we're going as a church. But just a little bit about the vision thing. You know how certain churches and certain organizations, they have like a theme for the year, right? So 2022, it's all going to be about joy, and we're going to go after joy this year. And after we get done with joy, then it's going to be about breakthrough. We're going to do the breakthrough thing, have the breakthrough conference, and after we get done with breakthrough, we're going to do the 40 days of purpose, and we just kind of cycle through things as a church. And what I want to say is, what we're doing, what Francis is going to cast vision for at some point when he gets better, is not like any of that. There's a permanence to where we're going. And we as leaders are praying that there will be a permanence in our lives, and there will be a permanence to this in the life of the church, because this is one of those things that is so central, it is so core, it is so obvious, it's so weighty, that it's almost like, woe to us if we ever move off this thing. And that's why we had to gather together like this. I mean, with everything that's going around in the world right now, it's not really convenient. Omicron is surging, things are happening, people are sick, people are going down, our worship leaders are going down, our preachers are going down, but we still have to gather the church together. EPA, Fremont, San Francisco, to come as one body and to hear, to listen, to pray, and to respond to what the Lord is doing in our midst. It's really that important. And I don't want anybody in our church family to miss it. So before the elders get up here, I'm going to just open up the scriptures a little bit. Back in seminary, one of my professors used to say to us, life isn't really that complicated. It's not that complicated. Sure, things in life can get complicated, but life itself is not that complicated. You just have to get the main thing right. And if you get the main thing right, everything else will just kind of work out. And so he was like, do you want to know what the main thing is? And we're all like, yeah, tell us. Like the secret to life. What's the main thing, And he said, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. That's the main thing. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. That's the main thing. And that's actually quite profound, because both individually and corporately, our lives tend to go awry. Our lives tend to get off track. Our lives tend to break down. Our lives tend to fall apart when we take the main thing and move it off to a side thing, and we take side things and make the main things. And when you don't keep the main thing, what ends up happening is fruitlessness, pointlessness, barrenness. Things don't move. Things don't change. Things don't grow. And sure, you can go through the motions. You can do a lot of stuff. You can run your programs. You can have your meetings. You can execute your plans. But none of it's going to matter. I will go so far as to say there are some things in life that are so central, that are so core, that are so important, that are so main thing, that if you get it wrong, it will ruin your entire life. And I'm not kidding, and I'm not exaggerating. That if you get this wrong, you can get everything else in your life right, and it won't matter. You can have the right job, you can have the right spouse, you can have the right financial situation. You can have all the right stuff, and it won't matter. Your life will still be ruined because all those right decisions will not be able to make up for and fix the wrong decision in this main thing category. And on the other hand, if you get this right, you can get everything else in your life wrong, and it'll be okay. It'll be okay. You can have the wrong job, you can be in the wrong city, and you can be cruising around in the wrong car, and yes, you will experience hardship, yes, you will experience pain, but you'll be okay if you get this right. And you'll find that you'll not only be able to survive these hardships, but you'll be able to thrive in the midst of them. Some things are just that important that you cannot get it wrong. You cannot afford to let it go by the side. You cannot let it afford to get away from the center and make it your main thing. Main thing's to keep the main thing the main thing. And that's what makes the story of 1 Samuel 4 so tragic. Israel let certain sacred, holy, central things go by the wayside, and it led to their ruin and their destruction. And this is one of Israel's lowest points in their history. And they had a lot of low points, but this is one of the lowest. And by the way, if you've ever read through the Old Testament and you're shocked and you're appalled and you're disgusted by how often the people of Israel constantly forget God, turn away from God, disobey God, break His commands, and follow other gods. If you're shocked by that, someone once put it like this. They said, it's kind of like looking at a painting from afar and thinking, man, that's an ugly, ugly portrait. And then as you walk closer, you realize it's not a painting, it's a mirror. I know that gave you a little heart alley, but that's okay. It's good for you. So we go back to 1 Samuel, and the spiritual leader over Israel at this time is a high priest named Eli, and he had two sons, Phinehas and Hophni. And this is how the Bible describes, these are the spiritual leaders of Israel. This was supposed to be the moral compass of an entire nation. And this is how the Bible describes these priests over Israel. Now the sons of Eli were wicked men. And they did not know the Lord. And these spiritual leaders over Israel would rob the temple sacrifices, and they would sleep with the women sleeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And this went on and on and on. And to a certain extent, Eli, the high priest, was okay with it. Because even though he rebukes his son and it wasn't even a strong rebuke. It was more like a little bit of a finger wagging. Even though he rebukes his son, what does the Bible say about Eli? He was fat. He was fat, and that's important. Because why was he fat? Because he joined with his sons in eating the stolen sacrifices from the people's offerings. That's why when God sends a prophet to judge Eli, God says to Eli, "You have scorned my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded for my dwelling, and you have honored your sons above me by fattening yourself on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel." And one of the surest ways that we know that we have lost our way, that we are spiritually off, that we are heading in the wrong direction like Eli, is that we have this passive, apathetic, accepting attitude to sin in our lives and in the lives of the people around us. That we've lost any sense of holy indignation, and we lost any sense of righteous anger over sin, and we just accept it. We just accept a low spirituality. We just accept a spirit of compromise. We just accept a lukewarmness to our worship, and we don't do anything about it. Like Eli. And that's how you know you're off. And the story goes on. Israel goes out to battle the Philistines, who have long been the enemies of the people of God. And they lose. 4,000 men they lose. And they're genuinely confused. They're like, how did this happen? I mean, aren't we God's people? Isn't God on our side? How could this happen? Isn't God's job to give us success and victory? And they don't get it. Their grasp of what is actually going on in the heavenly realms, in the spiritual realms, is so off. They have no clue as to what is the most important thing, which is, what does God actually think? And what does he say? And what is he doing? And this is what I'm talking about. When you've lost your center, when the main thing becomes a side thing, your radar is completely off. Your compass is completely off. And you're going to make all sorts of terrible decisions that will ruin you. And that's exactly what's going on here. Because Israel loses, and the elders of Israel get together, and they don't pray. They don't inquire. They don't ask God, what happened? What happened? What should we do? You know what they do? They plot and they plan, and the best wisdom that they came up with in their flesh, keep right into this thing, the best wisdom that they come up with in their flesh is, remember when we had the ark back in the wilderness? It did some crazy stuff. And remember when we had the ark and we're going in with Joshua? We took down Jericho. What if we bring the ark into battle with us to the Philistines, and we use it like a weapon to take down our enemies? That was their brilliant plan. And you got to remember this, that the ark was a holy thing. It was a sacred thing. It represented the presence of God with his people, and their brilliant idea was to use it like the Death Star. So they bring the ark of God up from Shiloh into battle. Obvious to everyone but them, terrible idea, because they get destroyed. They get destroyed. They get annihilated. 30,000 men died that day. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, die, and they lose the ark. They lose the ark. The Philistines take the ark. One guy escapes, runs 20 miles uphill from Aphek to Shiloh, and his clothes are torn. He's covered in dirt. He runs up to Eli and he says, Eli, Eli, I got terrible news. We lost the battle. But not only did we lose the battle, but 30,000 men died. And not only did 30,000 men die, but your 2 sons are dead. They were killed. And not only are your 2 sons dead, but the Philistines took the ark. The ark is gone. Eli hears this, falls backwards out of his chair, breaks his neck, and then he dies. Eli's daughter-in-law, who was pregnant at the time, hears the news of the battle, hears the news of the loss, hears the news of the death of Eli, her father-in-law, hears the news of the death of Phinehas, her husband, and hears the news that the ark is gone. She goes into premature labor and she gives birth to a son, and she names him Ichabod, meaning the glory has departed. The glory is gone. And then she dies. Ichabod, the glory of God has departed. Go ahead, do your thing, make your plans, sing your songs, have your gatherings, plan your churches. It doesn't matter because you lost the main thing. The presence of God is not there. That's Ichabod. The glory has departed. Go ahead, chase that promotion, cash in your investment, buy that house, drive that car, get your look right, get that beach vibe going, have the right friends, get invited to the right parties, live that Instagram life, and none of it matters if your life is Ichabod and there's no glory and there's no presence. That's why you can't let side things become main things. And you can't let main things drift off and become a side thing. Because if you don't keep the main thing in your life is going to be Ichabod. Don't worry, some good news coming. I'm not a downer preacher. Philistines take the ark, and they take it back to their temple, the temple of their god Dagon. And they're high-fiving, and they're like, we not only defeated Israel, but we defeated the God of Israel. He's now under our control. And the next morning, Dagon, their fertility god, their corn god, their main god, Dagon is laying face down on the ground before the ark of God. And the Philistines are like, what happened? Maybe it was a tremor. Maybe it was a prank. You know how those like rowdy Philistine teenagers get? We're going to get the Dagon cranes up. We're going to lift them. We're going to hoist them. We're going to dust them off. We're going to set them back up. That's what they did. They set Dagon back up. Next day, they come into the temple expecting to see Dagon. Dagon is once again face down on the ground before the ark of God. But this time, his head is cut off and his hands are cut off. And a little history lesson. Back in their day, this was a sign of complete and total defeat. This is what they used to do to the leaders of the opposing armies. They used to cut off the head, cut off the hands as a message to all the people. Your leader is completely defeated. He is rendered powerless. He cannot save you. He has no head. He has no hands. And it's just a little clue to them. It's a little clue to us that when you put your God next to the God and your God falls on its face, it's time to get a new God. When you put your hope in things that get broken into pieces, it's time to realize you're serving the wrong God. Chapter 5, verse 6 is really, really interesting because it comes right after the scene with Dagon's hands being cut off. And as the God of the Philistines' hands were cut off, the Bible says, verse 6, that the hand of Yahweh, Israel's God, was at work. And it was heavy. And it was moving. And it was moving against the Philistines at Ashdod. And so there's this outbreak at Ashdod, and so they send the Ark of the Covenant to Gath. The Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Gath, and tumors broke out, and outbreak broke out, and then they're like, oh my God, we can't keep the Ark here. So they send the Ark to Ekron. Ark's coming to Ekron, and the people of Ekron, the people of Ekron are like, no way, we got news from Gath, and we got news from Ashdod. We got news, and there's no way we're letting the ark come to Ekron. And this is what the Philistines said. We got to send it back. We got to send it back to Israel. And I just love this. These enemies of God send the Ark of the Covenant back to Israel. And they don't just send it back. They're like, we can't just send it back like by itself. We got to give it parting gifts. And so they send the Ark of God back with these gold parting gifts. And I love that because God's desire always is to be united with his people. And he is always at work to make that happen, even when we screw things up. So the ark gets sent back, and it passes through Beth Shemesh, and it ends up in a place called Kiriath Jearim, about 10 miles outside of Jerusalem. And it stays there. Siri. It stays there for 60 years. You guys know what? You see that's like it's kind of crazy, right? It stays in Kiriath Jearim for 60 years. Here's what's crazy about that. Israel loses the ark to the Philistines. The presence is gone. The glory is gone. Ichabod, right? And they don't even try to get it back. I mean, you would think that if the presence of God and the glory of God were so important to the people of God that they would do anything in their power to bring it back. They don't, but God does. And God moves to bring the glory and the presence back to his people. And upon getting the glory back, upon getting the presence back, upon getting access to God once again, they put the Ark of God in Kiriath Jearim. Inside their borders, outside the center. They put God on the fringe, 10 miles away from Jerusalem. Arm's length. Close enough to visit, but far enough that it doesn't affect their immediate lives. And for 60 years, they lived like this. You know what Kiriath Jearim represents? It represents a people who want just a little bit of God, but not too much. Just a little bit of faith, but no hunger. They want God on the borders of their life. Close enough to access when they need some inspiration, when they get caught up in a bind, when they need some comfort and security, but not so much that it would change anything about their lives. They want a convenient faith. They want intimacy with God without the commitment. They want influence without character. They want resurrection power without the cross. They want a Savior but not a Lord. They want the gifts but not the giver. They want God on the borders. That's Kiriath Jearim. And oh, that God would purge us of Kiriath Jearim faith. Oh, that he would purge us of everything that has the outward form of godliness but denies its power. It's not faith. It's not faith. It's an illusion. It's a fraud. It's counterfeit. And it's dangerous because it looks like faith from the outside, but inside there is no center. There is no glory. It's Ichabod. And for 60 years, they settled. The people of God settled for this lower version, this lesser version of what's possible when God is at the center of it all. And it wasn't until David shows up on the scene and refuses to settle for anything less than everything that God has for him. And David's passion, his passion was to bring the presence of God off the fringe and into the center. He wanted the ark of God in the city of God with the people of God, so that the glory of God can be reunited with the people of God, and the people of God can live and dwell and exist in the presence of God. That was David's passion. And I'm praying for We Are Church that we would have that passion. That we would have that passion. That we would not have this Kiryat Jearim faith that settles for God on the borders. But we would want God's presence in the center of everything that we do, no matter what it costs. And we don't settle. That we're not a people who settle. We don't settle for anything less than the very presence of God, the reality of God, the power of God, the holiness of God, the majesty of God, the glory of God to flood our lives in the life of the city. And that we would not get distracted, that we would not get deterred with side things, and that we would have this laser focus, keeping the main thing, the main thing. Life's kind of simple. Main thing is keep the main thing the main thing. That's the main thing. And Rob and Kevin Cheddar are going to come up and they're going to talk about how we as a church are going to move in that direction. So I invite you guys up.